Hey, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to just quickly go over an efficient way of using SmartVectors. If you aren't aware of what SmartVectors are, I'll give a brief summary here. Essentially, they are a localized track generator. It basically looks at the motion of each individual pixel, and it determines how much each individual pixel might be moving. You can determine how many pixels it's looking at in a cluster with this vector detail slider here. So one, you're going to get some very, very fine details. I'll make a little visualizer here. If you take a shuffle node, you can actually see what it's spitting out. So if I look here, I'll take a second, you can see it's looking at pixels about this size. You know, you're getting quite a lot of really small noise details because it's looking at a lot of pixels. If you crank that down, very smooth. It's looking at very general motion. Both of those can be useful in different scenarios. We're going to keep it fairly high because we're going to be trying to remove this. You know, you can do this a number of ways, but this is just for an example on whatever stock footage I found here. So most people will use SmartVectors by creating a vector generator or SmartVector generator and then making a vector distort. And by plugging SmartVector into here and source into here, you can then take whatever frame it's set to, so we're looking at frame 3, and it will transform frame 3 using the SmartVector by taking the motion. You can see all the edges are being stretched because we're not sampling new frames, we're just stretching the existing frames. Now, of course, that lets you put whatever you want on it. So let's go on this, frame here, and we'll paint out, paint this out. Whatever, really quickly. And blur it, whatever. It doesn't matter too much. We just blur that. Let's get rid of this too. Sure. And this, we're gonna go for like film skin, Great. So now if we watch this back, it's gonna take that frame that we frame held and it's going to just smush that along. Of course, we don't want everything, so what you might do is you might add a roto on your reference frame. And I don't remember where the things are. Just give it a bit of a roto. And after you do that, you can just pre-mult that, merge it over your plate, and now voila, you've got a paint out of, I've got to turn on pre-mult alpha. There you go. So now only these parts are being cut out, and you now have your paint out. Now that's fine and good if you're working with, this is a pretty small plate, this is a square 1080 by 1080, it's a PNG sequence, so it's going to run really quick, but once you start working with like 4K EXRs, you start working with really heavy plates, maybe you're doing for some reason you're doing CG, you really shouldn't be SmartVectoring CG, but let's just say for instance, and also you can see that it's not exactly foolproof, it doesn't account for different changes of lighting and whatnot. So I'm going to show you another way of going about this step. So we're going to just kind of copy this. Instead of using the vector distort directly, we're instead going to output something called an STMap inverse and an STMap regular. Now what these do instead of outputting your transformed source is they're going to give you an STMap. What is an STMap, you might ask? Well, it's basically a piece of footage that is a coordinate. So right here at the very bottom left, where blue is 1 and red and green are basically 0, that's going to equate to the x and y equals 0. So whatever point this is, that's going to be x equals 252 and y equals 688, whatever. Every one of these points, if you move them around, it moves the plate around. And it moves it around by using an STMap node. So I can plug this into my footage, turn on RGB, so it's sampling that. So now if I transform and I move around this STMap, you'll see it moves around my plate. And you might think, why not just use the transform directly? Well, if we key mix the transform with a soft roto to the original, so let's just, I don't know, something like that, and blur it. Now if we move this, it's only going to move that one area that we made changes to. Very cursed, but this is very useful in terms of giving you more control over your vector distortions. This is also very important for what I'm going to show you here in a second. So, a way to address this without frame holding is that if you take your STMap inverse, this will basically act as a stabilize. So you'll see when I press play, it's going to freeze everything. It looks like it's almost a frame hold, but you can still see all the edges getting skewed like it was before, because we're just doing the we're stabilizing instead of match moving using the vector distort. So now we've got a basically entirely unmoving plate to work with here. So that's great. That means we could do the paint that we did before live, which is very heavy, mind you. You probably don't want to be doing this, but just for sake of, demonstration, I can do this. And we will now and also set these to all frames. Now we will have a tracking mask that... oops, I need to put that after the STMap. Because we're stabilizing it, and then we paint it. So now, those changes are throughout the whole sequence. And then you just take the STMap again, plug it in over here, get the roto like you did before. And once again, we now have this. Although now, because we're using live updating background plates, it's not going to have a light difference like it did before. So if we go to like frame 91, and we look at the work we've done, and compare it, you can see there's an immediate difference. Now, of course, you do not want to be running a live roto paint through an STMap. I'm sure you could just blur this, but if you had to do something heavy like this, there is one thing that you absolutely should be doing. And especially if it's only working with a really small localized area of something like, these little, skin. It's not even like a zit. It's just like, if you're working with something really small like this, please, for the love of everything to do with your computing strength and RAM and your time and everybody else's time in the farm and everything, just track it. Doesn't have to be a good track. You can put it to like 5 steps of iteration. That'll just give you... Didn't last for very long. Yeah, don't really need the full sequence. That should be enough. Alright, so I got a track. Create your stabilized node. So now, for the whole duration of the shot, you will just be looking at that one part you want to do work on. So now, what you can do is, first and foremost, just need to explain what's happening with the SmartVector node. When you plug this in, sure, we're only, rotoing these 3 little points here. But the SmartVector node is sampling the full 1080 by 1080 node graph, which for some quick maths is 1,166,400 pixels, which, as for VFX is concerned, it's not that many. We usually work with much higher plates, but again, I'm just working with some stuff here. But if you can crop your stuff in before you do any SmartVector work to it, so I'm gonna crop this in, and then I'm gonna click reformat. Now this is a 50 by 50 sized crop region. It's very, very small. SmartVectoring this would be practically nothing. And it's the reason why this example isn't the best, because you could just roto and blur this now. You don't really need to SmartVector this particular plate, but the concept is still the same. So now you've got your crop node, you take your SmartVector and your vector distort and whatever, just copy all these. So now that you've got a much smaller region to be working with, this will load so much faster and much lighter weight than it normally would. Now again, we don't realistically in this plate need to be using a SmartVector. This can just be a track and a blur, or divide multiply setup. This is not the best example for plate wise, but in terms of you taking this idea where you want to crop your idea, you crop your region of change first, do some do the SmartVectors, you can stabilize it, do the work here, and then STMap it back. What you can then do is create a transform node, and whatever you did for your crop, and I'm just control clicking to drag here to make an expression. You can also just copy and paste these values. Now if I plug this over here and get a reformat back to your plate size, which in my case is, I don't have a aspect ratio that matches what I'm doing, so 1080 by 1080. And whatever you do, set that to none and no centering. So now, between that transform taking the values of the crop node and you reformatting it back to size, which you don't technically have to do, but I'd recommend you do, you will now see it matches your... Let's make some changes here. Terrible paint up, but you get the idea. Now if I turn it on or off, it will only be that same area. We basically moved it to the same. But we're looking at the stabilize. So if we want to go back to the plate, we just copy and paste our stabilize down here. We invert it. And what this also gives us is this gives us the option to use some very cheap motion blur directly out of the transform stabilize. By just turning on your motion blur there, setting it to center, you now have very, very cheap 2D motion blur compared to doing something like if you're over here, right? You're just working directly out of the vector distort. If you want to give this motion blur, you're going to have to do like a vector generator and like a vector blur, or maybe you want to use like a 2D motion blur. Like all of these are going to be doing with vectors, and you can pipe the vectors from the SmartVector into here somehow. But I generally, if you can avoid it, would recommend not. If you have to, you have to. I don't know what you're doing. But if you can avoid it, this strategy is nice because it's much lighter weight, it's much cheaper, and it's a lot more modular. You can have a lot more control with what's happening here since it's broken out into chunks. Yeah, that's all. So if you can help it next time, try not to pipe in the whole plate into the SmartVector. Try to use ST maps instead of the vector distort for more control. And also because if you need to pre-comp these things, like for your workplace, a lot of places will recommend you just pre-comp the SmartVector directly. I don't like that all that much because if you notice down here, you have a lot of extra layers for all these different SmartVector layers, which means when you pre-comp a SmartVector, you're pre-comping tons of channels. It's a ton of information. And the vector distort's still doing a ton of the work to actually transfer the SmartVector data into something usable based on your reference frame. So pre-comping your SmartVector directly doesn't really speed your script up a significant amount. Pre-comping it after here obviously would, but then if you have to make changes, you have to pre-comp it. But alternatively, if you pre-comp your ST maps, you now have something you can pre-comp and pipe directly into the ST map and go on with your day. Of course, it's not exactly cheap. I mean, ST maps are still quite heavy, but compared to running a live vector distort, running just an ST map is unbelievably quicker. And you can just, it doesn't have to do the frame-based reference frame, transforms anymore. It's just grabbing the ST map and running with it. So you'd pre-comp it, after here, and after here is your stabilize and your match move ST maps. And that's all I wanted to tell you. Hope you find this useful. Hope you get to use it. Hope you have a great day. Let's have a great Monday.